Welcome back, everybody, to the Hannibal TV. I have with me today Dr. G. Dr. G is a clinical and forensic psychologist. Some of you may have seen him if you're like my wife and you're always watching Law and Crime, or if you're watching Court TV and some of these other channels. You may have seen him on there giving his analyses of different cases that have been out there, especially some high profile ones. But he's on drgexplains.com. He's also got his own YouTube channel, Dr. G Explains. And he's been jumping into some of the topic recently, so we wanted to have him on and go ahead and introduce anything you want to add there, Dr. G, that I missed.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you having me on. I do typically cover lots of true crime, politicians. I cover a little bit of everything, talk a lot about body language. And yeah, recently I've really been talking a lot more about UFO whistleblowers, and it's just such a fascinating subject to me. I'm really starting to dive into it, but I'm loving it so far.
Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, that's, that's the amazing part of this is that and I hear you talk about it, right? It's so different, the law and crime aspect of it. And then when you come over here into ufology and you start listening to whistleblowers, right? Because you find a lot of the ones that you do, the deception detection type work on in law and crime, I think you even say 99% of the time they're lying, right? But it seems like, are you somewhere around 2 for 2 so far that you don't feel like they're lying, as like Lazar and Barber, the ones you've been listening to?
It's fascinating, right? Yes. So basically, true crime is where, I mean, that's really where my career is, because as a forensic psychologist, I for better or worse, I live and breathe a lot of the true crime stuff. So I actually work in that field. So I'm used to people lying to me all the time. That's a big reason I got into body language. It's to everybody I talked to, worked with, analyzed was lying. And I gave a lot of assessments. And so I would have objective measures that would say, yes, this person's lying. And the more I got interested in learning body language and deception and all of these things, the more I started branching out a little bit beyond what my specialty is, because people wanted to know, well, is this person lying? Is this person lying? So I said, well, let's start looking at that. Bob Lazar was the single most requested video I've had for like 2 years. And I kept resisting it because I was like, I don't know if anybody's really going to care that much. People request it, but maybe it's just a handful of people. Turns out people really are interested in that. And I was fascinated when I started watching Lazar. It was like, I can watch, I do a lot of analyses of serial killers, which are famously good liars. Serial killers are great liars, but they all have tells. When I watch them, I can still tell you when they're lying. Bob Lazar didn't have any tells. If he's a liar, he's a hell of a good one. So,
yeah, I heard you say that he would be the best liar ever, right?
Absolutely.
If that were the case.
Absolutely. If he, yeah. And so the two that I've analyzed have been, I'm trying to go sort of in order of the requests that I get. Jake Barber was another one, a fascinating story. And I analyze specifically the body language. I'm not analyzing the content of what they're saying, because on its face, that for anybody that's familiar with Jake Barber and what he's talked about, it sounds crazy. Like the things he says sound wild. So if I was just going based on what he's saying, I try to be neutral. I try to ignore the content, because if I'm focused on, well, the content of what he's saying doesn't sound real, so he must be lying, I do none of that. It's purely based 100% on the body language that I'm looking at.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that's one of the things with ufology. I mean, as you dive into it, how long have you been following the subject, or what got you pointed in the direction of looking at those two?
So, I mean, I've had a casual interest in it for a long time. I think like many people do, but I haven't been properly into UFOlogy or ufology until fairly recently. Until people started insisting I do Bob Lazar, I really wasn't paying that much attention to it. But I just got curious because it kept coming up so much. I was like, there's got to be something here to this. Why does everybody keep asking for this?
Well, what's your take so far? I mean, what's your take just generally into, ufology, if we just want to use that
sure.
nomenclature for it? Like, what's your take on it so far? Like,
so far, I'm finding, well, first of all, I'm running into a lot less lying and deception that I have in true crime, which fascinates me, because I'll tell you my expectation versus what I found. My expectation would be that I would run into people that I thought were probably mentally ill or something like that for some of them, which it just sort of assumed that at a baseline. And if they were, I wouldn't cover them. Just so you know, my rule is like, if I watch something and I'm like, that person's probably delusional, I'm not going to cover it. It would feel exploitative to me in that sense.
That's fair.
Yeah, I can talk about it in true crime because mental illness in that sense plays a part into it. So it's different then. But when it comes to this, I'm like, I just wouldn't cover it. I wouldn't be deceptive in that way. I just literally would just not do it. And so, but what I'm finding so far is there are a lot of people that are very honest, that are very earnest in what they've experienced, and they want people to hear about these experiences.
Yeah.
It's fast. Not everybody. And there are definitely people we'll talk about that I do not think are telling the truth, but a shocking number of percentage of people show signs of honesty. It's just very, very surprising to me.
Yeah, and it's a complicated subject for sure. But do you feel like as you get into this, some of these people are coming from defense backgrounds or they worked inside the military and things like that? Have they been through some type of training on how to deceive someone like you?
Some of them may have been. I mean, that's possible. It's harder to do than you'd think, though. The subtle body language. I mean, if it's not impossible that somebody could really be skilled at it and sneak by on that stuff. I mean, it is possible, but it's so much harder to fake body language than you would think. I mean, there's a reason that certain actors are thought of as being so good because it's just very, very difficult to get in that headspace. And all of us get exposed to fake stuff online every day. If you get on social media at all, you can tell within like a second if something's a setup, right? I mean, most people just aren't good actors. But as far as somebody's trained by the military, I mean, they could be. I mean, that's possible. So it's not foolproof.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's what I wonder about with some. Yeah, I think that's what I wonder about with someone like Jake Barber is, could there be the potential there? Knowing that he received some very secretive trainings, could there have been some training? I mean, when you're doing the law and crime scenario, I mean, wouldn't the defense go in and walk their defendant through something where they're putting them through some type of training on body language? Or do you know that, or do you know if they?
I don't think that some of them. I'm sure that they talk about presenting yourself in a certain way, what you wear, all of that. They probably wouldn't use it in the specific context of body language, but they would be like, be mindful of this, don't do this, don't do that. I'm sure that some of that happens, but really being able to train oneself to pass with flying colors body language is really, really hard. I mean, there's some obvious things like, don't cross your arms and seem, defensive and stuff. I mean, there's some stuff that everybody knows, but the subtle things, most people have a very hard time controlling. I would have a hard time controlling it, and I know it extremely well. So.
Yeah, because I mean, that's why I wonder, just like preparing the witness or preparing your defendant or preparing someone to give their account or give their story. I just wondered how much training some of these people are going through and saying, watch for this, don't do this. Almost like they're tells, and they don't want to show these types of things. So I just was curious if you had ever heard of that, like as far as going beyond just preparedness, like what you're talking about with not sitting with like this and things like that, but also, I've heard you give feedback on like when you're looking at Jake Barber or Lazar about how they sit with their body open or how they are staying engaged, or do they lean forward when they say stuff. I didn't know if there was that level of coaching on a law and crime side. I just assumed in a defense setting that some of these people, if there is that type of campaign going on where you are reliant on Jake Barber or someone like that to give a good performance, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but if they're required to give a good performance, hey, Jake, we need you to go in this interview. It's going to be aired everywhere. We need you to, you got to put your best foot forward. If they coach them on some of these things about, what's the common one I hear with like light detecting of if they glance to one direction or if they're glancing to the upper right or in the lower left and things like that, like, do they get into that type of training with them?
Some people might. That specific stuff, like which direction you look, the research shows that that's pretty unreliable. So I actually don't. I look at whether or not somebody's looking away, but what direction and stuff I don't pay attention to. But there are other people that do. So there are different body language experts that disagree with me on that. But I actually don't pay attention to that type of detail. But yeah, you definitely could get that more so than just getting training. You'd have to get really good at controlling your emotions, because that's what reading body language is it's emotional leakage. So if you're feeling something and you know how to hide it, then you might be able to get one by on somebody. But it is hard, because even not moving, even stopping showing body language can be a telling thing, because our brain, with the freeze, flight, and fight response, if you've ever heard of fight or flight, I can't talk. It's actually freeze, then flight, then fight. So the first thing people do is freeze. So when people are lying and it's a big one, sometimes they'll be like, if I'm talking right now with my hands, if I start lying, you might see me get a much more still, stop moving around so much. So there's even the absence of body language. So that not only do they have to know what not to do, they have to know what to continue to do to make things convincing. So it's a very hard thing to control all of those. But it's obviously it'd be possible. I'm sure that there are people that work for the government that have been trained in body language extensively, but whether or not Jake Barber was, I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, and it's just some of the statements he's made about, and this is where I was asking you questions about what your exposure was to ufology, because there's so many dichotomies. So I didn't know if you knew all the politics that were out there with ufology. There's all these different camps. So
what I've been trying to do is to keep myself relatively neutral so that I don't have any biases as I go through and analyze these things. So there is a lot I don't know, and there's part of that that's intentional. I'm curious about some things, but I'm not trying to find out who do people like, who do they not like. Like that part of it I'm pretty good at staying neutral, but I don't even want to know for everything that I do. It's not that I can't talk about it, but I try to stay to not get too deep into some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's where we try to come from on this channel as well. So I completely understand that. Can you tell us who you would be looking at next? Or you were talking before we came on about some people that get requested a lot for you to do.
So the big request right now, Matthew Brown is one that I've been getting a lot of requests for, because he did a recent interview on.
Oh, that's a good one.
The Weaponized podcast. I haven't watched it yet, but I've reached out to the Weaponized podcast. They go for it. It's all good. So I'm gonna analyze that. But I haven't watched.
That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that one.
So well, hopefully it'll be interesting. One that I've gotten requests for is Dan Burish, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's
David Grush.
No, not David Grush. This guy's different. I've done David Grush actually. He was the first one I did. I did him about 2 years ago. Yeah. No, this guy's name is Dan Burish, and he's somebody that apparently is kind of divisive, like Burisch, maybe that's how you spell it. But people were emailing me saying, "Hey, could you look at this guy?" And I watched a few minutes of that, and I was like, "I don't believe a word this guy's saying." So this will be one where I am telling you entirely that this is. I will show exactly why I don't believe anything that he's saying about any of the things that he's experienced.
Awesome. Yeah, because some of the big ones that come up that I see even pop up in some of your comments is like we were talking about Stephen Greer.
That's a big one, right?
That's going to be a big one.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for good interviews where you're going to get to see a lot of content and you'll be able to cut as much as you want, he did one on Jesse Michaels' podcast with American Alchemy, so that's a good one. And even some of the ones like a Lou Elizondo. So the reason why I was taking you down this path with Jake Barber is because we wonder the same thing of someone like a Lou Elizondo coming from. He gets called a disinformation agent a lot. So have you watched any of Lou's stuff? I know he was on CNN a lot and he's been a name that's been out there, but have you seen Lou Elizondo or watched any of his content?
Is he the one that was saying that aliens are here to harm us or something like that? Or no, or maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. I'll need to go back. I can't say definitively if I've watched him or not. There's a lot of folks bits of. But
he was the one that he introduced a lot of the 2017 stuff when that came out about the Tic Tac. He was always on Fox News or CNN. So
gotcha. Okay. I'll have to go through and review his. I will say with Dr. Stephen Greer, his will be interesting because he's got so much content out there. One of the challenges with body language is that if somebody has repeated the same thing over and over again, eventually they don't feel anything anymore when they say it. So you really have to catch people either at a really meaningful interview or one that's high stakes or early on. Like the earlier, the better. Because, like I said, if you repeat, that's why when I did Bob Lazar's interview, I looked for one of the earliest ones I could find. Because if let's just say he wasn't telling the truth and he'd said it for 20 years, it's going to be much harder to read now than it would have been 20 years ago. So I look for early stuff. But so finding the right content of Dr. Greer is what I'm looking for. I want to make sure it is something that is high stakes where there could be some real emotion that would come through, so I can get a good feel for whether or not he's being deceptive.
Yeah, there was a lot of emotion in that one.
Good. Okay.
With him and Jesse Michaels. But the one I was telling you about before we came on was one with Chris Bledsoe on Coltart. So that's one that just was released recently. So that would be a really good one to look at, because that's a big story that's going on right now. I don't know if you're aware, but he made a prophecy that there's going to be some mass awakening in 2026. So a lot of people have their eyes on him right now. So that would be a really good one for you to do next as well.
That sounds interesting. And one thing I said this on my video, but I'll say here because I think it's important for anybody that hasn't watched any of my content, is that I hate people that manipulate and lie. It bothers me so immensely. So my goal here, it's not that I look out to expose specifically liars. I'll watch people and say if they're telling the truth. But if I feel like someone is lying or trying to be manipulative, you are going to know it. I have no reason not to tell you if I think someone's a liar. So when I say someone is being honest, I really mean that's what I believe. And I'm looking for some people that I can, well, not looking for people to expose, but I'm going to be more than happy if there is somebody and I'm like, I don't believe a word this guy's saying, to let everybody know that too.
Well, how do you not let that give you a bias in the situation of someone like a Chris Bledsoe? Because like in 2008, there was a Discovery episode called the Fayetteville Incident, and you can watch that if you want before you do his. I don't know if it gives you a bias or not, but in that he fails a polygraph test.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your take is on polygraph tests. I wanted to hear your take on it, because it seems like people say they're shit if they fail them, and they celebrate them when they're passed. So
they're inconsistent. There's a reason they're not admissible in court, because if you're an anxious person or you're just really nervous, you're going to have it's going to look terrible. So like if you have an anxiety disorder, I know nothing about Chris Bledsoe, but for example, if you have an anxiety disorder and you take a polygraph, good luck. It's going to be all over the place. So unless you can get a really good baseline with somebody, the results aren't that meaningful. I think that polygraph tests can be, a useful tool, but I don't think they're 100% by any stretch. So if somebody fails a polygraph test, that's one piece of different pieces of evidence I'd want to look at. But that's not all of a sudden, okay, then I'm going to throw out everything because he failed that. That doesn't mean that much to me.
Yeah. But it still sounds like for this topic, you have to be a pretty open-minded person, right? Because again, wouldn't you come into it with a bias of this guy or gal can't be telling the truth? I mean, how do you not let that sway you?
Well, part of it is, I mean, that's challenging, right? Because with the last video, particularly the Jake Barber one, because some of his claims are so outrageous, I had to think like, that my reputation is on the line here if I come out and say that, because I literally go to court, I go to trials, no doubt and I don't really care. My conversations about this kind of stuff, it will definitely get used against me. Say, hey, this guy talks about UFOs and people that believe in this and that. So like, I even question myself, how do I feel about telling people that I don't think this person is lying? So yeah, but my goal more than anything else, I care so much about telling people what I see and being neutral that I'm able to pretty much block all that stuff out. I mean, that's kind of what I do for a living because I do a lot of therapy. And so, I have to be able to be neutral with people that come in with all sorts of issues. This doesn't really feel that different. And compared to a lot of the murders and stuff I've dealt with, it feels I can get, if I can be neutral about murders, I can be neutral about people talking about this stuff. So I'm able to compartmentalize any preconceived stuff.
Good point.
So
yeah. Well, and I mean, it's the part of it where that's where we struggle in this community. Those of us that are covering the topic is because we have preconceived bias against these people because of past events. There's a history, a deep, deep history. That's why you're getting so many comments about Dr. Stephen Greer. When we did a big Dr. Stephen Greer episode here on Hannibal, it was one of our top viewed because he's such a highly polarizing person. So I think that's why you're getting so many of those type statements. When you were watching Jake Barber though, and he was getting emotional, can you kind of talk about that again? And I don't know if people definitely need to go back. Those who are listening and those who are going to watch this, go check out Dr. G Explains, where he does these and the other ones if you're into law and crime. But I was glad that you covered somebody who gets emotional in their or that you picked at least that part, because it's like a 2.5 hour episode that
very
Cold
long.
Tart had to put in there.
Yeah.
So you cut out the best part though. You got the part where he gets emotional, and I'm so appreciative you did that. But I think you make a statement in there that it is extremely hard for people to cry and do it genuinely, right?
If you watch a lot of trials or watch any trials, you get the benefit of watching people try to fake cry all the time. Because that's a big part of like psychopaths and people who lie. They manipulate. So they want to fake cry. So I see people doing fake crying constantly. It is so hard. The nuance that comes with actually feeling deep emotion, whether or not you want to hold it back, you let a little bit out, like going through that process, there's a genuineness and a nuance to it that is exceptionally hard to fake. Jake Barber seemed authentic, 100% authentic. Whether or not you believe what he said is accurate, that emotion was real, and he felt something. You could say, well, it was all in his head or whatever. I mean, people that want to perform, it will look like a performance because they always overdo it. People never know how to subtly cry an appropriate amount or to show an appropriate amount of emotion. They want to make sure you get it, so they tend to hit you over the head with it a little too much. So I find it exceptionally unlikely that any of that was inauthentic.
Yeah. And I think that's the only one I can think of where there was that much emotion. Other than that, I mean, if you get into some of the Dr. Greer ones, especially the ones on Jesse Michaels' podcast, he gets angry with him at times.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if there was some perceived notion with that. When you are doing this type of analysis on someone and you see them getting upset a lot or defensive, is that a specific tell, or do you ever see that go one way or the other in what they're trying to cover up, or is it just because they feel inferior in the conversation or superior in the conversation?
So obviously I'll have to watch it to be very specific about it. But anger, when we think about anger, it can do two things. One, it can protect us, or it can shape the behavior of others around you. So in essence, like if he's not liking the way he's being treated, sometimes people just, it might be a very authentic expression of anger. I'm not, like I said, I'd have to look at the context more, but anger is not always a sign of deception or lying. Actually, I tend to focus more on the opposite, that when people are trying to hide that, then they're more likely to be lying. When they're passionate, they're letting you see everything. They're letting you see their body language. Then we're oftentimes tapping into real emotions. Doesn't necessarily mean everything he said was true, but that we might be tapping into something more interesting there. So I'll definitely be curious to look at that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, and again, it's just one of those situations where he's getting very emotional now. It's the opposite way of how Jake would be. Jake's getting emotional because he felt like he made or this, whatever it was, made an impression on him. With what you'll notice if you've not watched a lot of Jesse Michaels, it's usually a battle of wits. So I think Dr. Greer wanted to make sure that he knew that he was the wittiest of them all in that one. But, and going into one of your other ones with Grush, and remind me, which Grush review did you do? Did you do the one of Coulthard, or did you do the one of him on Capitol Hill?
Both, actually. Those were the first ones I did. I did those.
Both.
I'd forgotten when we were talking about it. I first did the one with Cold Heart, and then I did the Capitol Hill one a little while later. Like that one was essentially when it happened. So yeah, I covered both of those.
Okay. Yeah, because I think a lot had come out that he was dealing with some trauma and things in his life. You didn't feel though that you were dealing with that scenario, right? Because you had said earlier that you don't like doing these analyses on people where you just feel like they're not, like you're taking advantage of the situation because they're obviously dealing with something. You never got that feeling with David Grush, did you? Like that, oh, this guy's off or seems off or something.
No, there was never any concerns I had in that regard. I know a lot of people had comments about his mental health, but nothing that would impact what he was saying. I mean, if somebody has PTSD, they might be a little more anxious, so that might affect their body language, but that's not going to affect whether or not they're being deceptive. So even with those kinds of issues, I don't think it would have had much of a bearing on what I saw anyway.
Yeah, because haven't you co-authored some things on PTSD or helping troops adjust? Yeah. I thought I read something on your website about that.
That's right. It was a treatment manual for soldiers trying to reintegrate basically after being deployed or people that had been downrange. So I used to work a lot with soldiers. I do a bit less now, but yeah. So I co-authored a book on treating. Actually, the book is for clinicians on how to treat PTSD. So it's very boring. That nobody should read it. That's not a clinician. So
Well, I only bring it up because I feel like it's valid when
Yeah.
you're getting ready to sit down with someone who could potentially have dealt with PTSD. I mean, he was deployed, and
Sure.
I don't know what all he went through. I mean, that right there enough would give me PTSD if I was just even deployed into a war zone.
Sure. Yeah.
But it just made me wonder with that, because I felt like his presentation was completely different in the two settings. So,
I did
the
too.
one on Capitol Hill,
Yeah.
he seemed more, and I'm picking up on some of the things that you would say where he's leaning forward a lot. And then in the other ones, he's more laid back or sitting back in his chair. I didn't know if you picked up on that as well.
I did. Well, it was funny because when I did the analysis of the cold heart interview, I kind of ended it with I was a little vague in how I didn't say ultimately whether I thought I wasn't definitive about whether or not he was telling the truth or whether or not he was lying. But he had a lot of signs of body language that I was like, I don't love this. These are things that are concerning. He fixed all of those by the time he was on Capitol Hill, and I was like, I don't know if he saw my video or if he just felt differently on Capitol Hill, but he didn't do any of the stuff I pointed out. So yeah, he seemed much clearer, and sometimes the editing on videos might affect that too. You never know sort of how they're piecing it all together. But seeing him on Capitol Hill, he was great when he did that. Like all of his body language was on point. There was nothing concerning at that point that I recall.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess how you compare the two whenever you're dealing with you're under oath in one, and the other one it's more laid back. And to your point, that's a great point. I didn't think about that. The edited nature of one, where they're piecing things together, can make you seem completely different. But
Yeah.
does that change your analysis at all? Like if you're looking at somebody, so say for example, you're listening to Grush in a relaxed environment, and then you're watching him on Capitol Hill, does that sway you to believe him more or less?
The Capitol Hill situation there's so much pressure there. And I will say that so I tend to lean towards that being actually more meaningful, because it's just like when I watch somebody in an interrogation or in court versus when they're doing an interview, because I've seen people that have been on 2020 or whatever, and then you watch their interrogation. The context is so different. You can definitely rely more on the real, true high pressure situations. There was one thing in the Ross Coldheart interview that bothered me and still does. There's just something about it that doesn't sit well with me, where he's talking about it and he says that it's true and he shakes his head no. Typically, we nod and shake our heads on accident all the time. If we're saying like, no, that didn't happen, you'd be surprised at how oftentimes people will subtly say like, no, their head, yes, it did, even if they're saying no, or they'll say no or they'll say yes and they'll be doing this. He did it so emphatically. Sometimes people shake their head for emphasis, but it didn't look like that. So it bothered me immensely when he said it's true and he did this. I was like, I was a real sticking point for me. But but as I often say that I don't look at one piece of evidence. I look at converging lines of evidence. I need a lot of evidence. Like I'm not going to take one thing and just say, just based on this one thing, I'm throwing out the rest. It's all bullshit. But there was just something about that was so emphatic. I had a hard time with that. But a lot of his body language outside of that has been pretty solid. So I might actually go back and reanalyze some of that and just sort of take a second look at it, because people like his stuff so much.
Well, do you look at any of the other emotional triggers, such as sweating, as a big tell?
I don't pay a ton of attention to that. Actually, now that I think about it, because I don't see it a whole lot, I guess so I guess it could be meaningful, but it's not something I run across a whole lot.
Yeah, because Nixon used to sweat a lot.
Yeah.
I want to bring that up is because when Lazar did the Joe Rogan podcast, he was sweating. He was saying he was dealing with a headache, and he seemed very nervous. I don't know. Did you see him on Rogan?
I've watched little bits of that. I haven't analyzed it because I don't know how aggressive Rogan's people are when it comes to like using their content. So I just haven't. That's the only reason I haven't covered it actually. But people, I had a lot of comments about that saying, "Oh, well, he's having migraines," or making fun of him, saying, "Well, that he's lying because of this and that." Which as someone who, I don't even like saying the word migraine because I get them sometimes, and I couldn't do a full interview if I was having one. So if that's real, then
You don't want to make fun of it. I've been
no,
there too.
yeah. So I'll take a look at that one at some point. But there could be alternate explanations for some of those things.
Yeah, because it's not just they're sitting up, sitting forward, leaning back, being open, things like that. I'm wondering about some of the fidgetiness, and again, it could be the setting if he is getting fidgety, that's where I try to give some difference in, like, okay, if you're in a setting where they're going to edit it together, it's just like having someone on here. We're live right now. If I told you we're going to record this, we may act completely different. I don't know. You may think, okay, well, if I say something stupid, maybe he'll edit it out for me. I don't know if that's what's going on in their brains, but
Yeah.
you could just tell that it was high stakes when he was in front of Rogan, because he knew that was going to be his biggest. And it doesn't help that in that one, Jeremy Corbell is kind of his handler, and Jeremy's jumping in all the time to kind of like bail Bob out in certain scenarios. So.
And it's got, to that point, it has like 60 some odd million views just on YouTube. So it really did have a lot of people did watch it. So, the nerves were probably pretty fair for him to have at that time.
Yeah. So what would you say is probably the most challenging review you've ever done, or analysis? I mean, it wouldn't be in ufology, would it? I mean, is it more of a law and crime where you just cannot get a read on somebody? I mean, I know you talk about John Wayne Gacy and stuff like that, but
those are fun, though. Like the serial killers are fun because they're they have their own sort of weird ticks, and they tend to do the same thing over and over again. So people always say, well, hindsight's 2020. Of course you can tell that they're, that they did it, or that they're lying or whatever. But I talk about a lot of people that are in the midst of trials, or that have not, or people who have just done interrogations and those kinds of things. As far as the toughest one that I've done, the ufology stuff, like talking about somebody being truthful is easy. So far, it's actually been the easiest stuff I've done, because I'm just, it's the only hard thing about it is trying to like make sure that the content is interesting, saying, yeah, he's still telling the truth, basically. But as far as, so okay, here's the toughest one I've done. I did one on this guy who's currently getting ready to go to trial, and they used that my video as reasons why they shouldn't have cameras in the courtroom. So after that, I did another video anyway, and that one was hard to try to thread that needle, because I was like, I know they're watching this, and I know this guy who may or may not have killed 5 people is watching it. So that one definitely, it was one that I gave more thought to. That trial is coming up in like October or something. It's a pretty high profile one, and I really made them angry. So
oh wow, yeah, because I mean, I was watching yours, a situation that happened in between me and you, right? I'm in Carolina, you're in Georgia. Alex Murdaugh, I mean, and that was one that all of us were captivated on. I don't know about nationwide. I knew nationwide it made documentaries, Netflix and stuff like that, but here in the South, that was a big deal. And again, speaking of someone who is emotional, he was emotional the whole time on the stand, right? So I mean, it's just like, does this help him? Is that just real emotion of he's feeling bad about what he did, and it's finally coming out on the stand? I mean, how did you read that?
So he tried really hard to squeeze tears out and couldn't do it. That's what I recall, is that he would constantly try to cry, and he would just make all these noises and drool and all this and nothing, and he couldn't get anything out. So I think most people, or a lot of people, noticed that too. So yeah, he tried his best. There are different kinds of psychopaths, and some of them are manipulative in that way. Some of them are entirely emotionless. He was the more sort of highly emotionally expressive type. It just didn't work out well for him.
Yeah.
That was a tough one, though. I knew people that were in that's from the low country, and I know lots of people in Savannah, so I actually knew people that were in the gallery. So I know that one well.
Yeah, I figured you would. You would, because of it being regional. Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad you brought that up, though, about like, going back to ufology and Bledsoe and the lie detectors and things like that. So I didn't know if you knew that Lazar had been through one as well.
I didn't know that.
A lie detector test. Yeah, and but they also get into this, and you having a background obviously in psychology and everything else, like uh, what do you make of this like hypnosis type work? Because I think they did that with Lazar and trying to go back through, and I'm seeing them do that a lot in ufology. And I don't know if you've watched that because they're starting to film these as well, and they're starting to
Yeah.
show um, different people who were experiencers or having situations, and they take them back through a regression to where they can tap back into whatever emotions they felt at the time. And I didn't know if what your take was on that, but it seems to be an area that we're kind of getting into in ufology, where um, this thing like with Jake Barber that you heard about, psionics, and getting into like remote viewing and where the mind can take you and things like that. But I'm starting to notice more and more where they want to put people back into these scenarios where they do this hypnosis type work. And I didn't know if you just had any opinion on that, like if you start seeing that as a formal analysis.
Hypnosis is a tricky one because that's part of my training when I got my first master's degree was, part of that is learning hypnosis. A lot of it's useful for relaxation and those kinds of things. But as soon as you start exploring memories with hypnosis, it gets to be very tricky and very complicated. As a clinician, because obviously this is just part of what I do. I would not personally encourage hypnosis when it comes to those kinds of situations. I think that gets into some parts of the mind you might it's a little too delicate for me to think that that's a good idea personally, but I'm pretty conservative when it comes to that stuff. So yeah, I personally would stay away from the hypnosis when it comes to those things.
Yeah, and a lot of it is trying to again tap back into some feelings or emotions, or walking them back through step by step of a past situation. And I noticed that they did that with Lazar as well. I don't know how much credence I give it, but I didn't know people from your community, do they give it any weight
Well,
when they start
well,
seeing that type of thing?
what we found out back, I think this was back in the 70s or 80s, there was research that showed that we can accidentally create memories very easily in hypnosis.
Oh
So
yeah.
unless you have somebody that's really, really good at what they're doing, if you're talking about, do you remember this or do you see this? Or if you give them any influence at all, you can literally create memories for people through hypnosis. So you've got to really know what you're doing in that front. And so that's it's not that it couldn't be useful. I just think that it's too precarious to, but yeah, I think many people in my field would probably agree with that assessment. Most would probably be like, yeah, you probably should stay away from the hypnosis stuff. Because when it comes to working with trauma, I don't do hypnosis either. Some people are very big on it. I'm not. I think that there's just the mind is too fragile to mess around with some of those things. So
Yeah, and I think that's where it's going to be tricky for you a little bit in ufology, and not from your analysis. I think it's
yeah.
from the idea of some of these people may actually believe what they're saying. So with Chris Bledsoe, for example, he's
Mhm.
seeing orbs, and you know we don't know if people are messing with him. We're in the community, we're trying to figure out. He's talking about having friends in the CIA and in the military. Um, are these people flying things from bases that are near him over here in eastern North Carolina, flying drones by his house, and it's messing with him? So, if you were to do an analysis of him and you look and you go, yeah, I actually believe this guy is he's believing what he's saying. It could be more of a government deception thing, and that's where there has been case after case of this, where you would talk to somebody and they're going to tell you the truth as they know it,
Mhm.
but they were actually part of some government disinformation campaign. There will be another one for you that you'll need to look into if you look into Rick Doty, Doty. He has
That's
been in
another
some
one I've been getting. People have
weird
been emailing.
documentaries, and he actually said that he did some work for the Air Force and like
Okay.
things like that. So that oh, you have heard that one, the Rick Doty one.
People have been emailing me about that. I'm not familiar with it in that sense, but I know I've been getting requests about that specifically. So
That'll be a big one because he's known for deception somewhat. Not as far as what he's saying, but as far as
yeah.
what his background is in. Disinformation and deception. So Yeah, we'll definitely send some more comments your way, and on the videos. And I'm glad you're reading the comments. It sounds like you're already seeing some of the names we're throwing out there to you, because I'm one of the fans that's watching it. And we're constantly throwing out some names, trying to see who we can get you to analyze next. Uh, you know, before we let you go, any questions you have for the UFO community? Is there anything like that stumps you that maybe we can help you with? Is there something that you've come across in ufology where you're like, what the heck is this all about?
Well, one of the things I get curious about is that there's so many like whistleblowers where what they say conflicts with each other. Like, do you sort of have the people that you're like, okay, all of them, this seems like the most realistic like group here, or like, are there people for people that are really into it, I just wonder how you parse apart who you trust and who you don't.
Yeah. And that's the hard part. It really is. When someone, and we harp on this guy a lot here, Chris Bledsoe, but I'm using him as an example. He's, you and me being from the South, he's our
Yeah.
next door neighbor. When
Yeah.
you start watching him, you're going to be like, oh, he's like thousands of Southerners I've met.
Sure. Yeah.
He'll do anything for you type people. So immediately, that's why I was asking you about bias earlier, is because you immediately want to believe him.
Yeah.
Okay. Because he is the guy next door.
Yeah.
He'll feed your fish while you're away. He'll, take your garbage out for you while you're on vacation. He's going to be that kind of neighbor.
Yeah.
And so that's where it makes it really hard. And that's where we're trying to figure out, is he being deceived, or is he actually telling the truth as he knows it, or is he doing the deceiving? So it, it is tough. I know a lot of people really jump in on certain subjects, and they really believe it. I think the ones that I tend to watch more are the people like the 2017 with Commander Fravor. When you take someone, and I think about it just like court, right? If I were to present Commander Fravor in court, how would he do? He would be an outstanding witness, right? Because he's a Top Gun pilot, impeccable service history, and all these great things. And he's never had a bad history of anything. And now he tells a story as a trained operator in the sky of seeing something. So for those of us, when we watch that, it's hard not to believe him, right? And hard not to, and it's just because of if I was sitting up there in court, and on the jury, if I would be listening to him give his testimony, it'd be hard not to believe, right? So I just kind of apply it that way.
So, now, if I remember, was he one that also testified with Grush and then Graves? I think there were 3 people that testified together. He may have been one of them, or maybe not. But I think I analyzed all 3 of them, and all 3 of them seem to be pretty consistent.
Yes. Yeah. Graves was the F-18 pilot on the East Coast here with us in Virginia Beach. And then Fravor was the F-18 pilot off San Diego. And he was part of the 04 Nimitz case. And yeah, that's where it gets very interesting, is when it's high-ranking military officials. I think we went for so long of it being just people like me and you, right? Just normal people going out in their backyard, and it's so hard to believe that person because we don't know that person, right? But when you can attach a lot of service history or things like that, like, okay, they were a Top Gun pilot for this long, and they had this many flight hours in an F-18, and and you start attaching all of the qualifications, and now it helps us kind of move the ball forward a little bit. Otherwise, there's a lot of money makers in this community, so that's where it gets a little tough. And you'll come to find that as you continue to dig, there's a lot of book selling going on. There's and look, these people have to make a living too, right? I get it. I understand that, but at the same time, you have to kind of weigh that in. I don't know if Fravor's selling anything. I've never seen him sell me anything, so that always helps the situation.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that fascinates me, and I'll talk about this when I cover some of the videos of people that I don't think are telling the truth, or for some of them that anybody's believing them, because some of them are so, and it's not just what they're saying is outlandish, but like the body language is so bad that they're so obviously lying. There was one guy who I was watching who was his body was like he was splayed out, his legs were open, his body was open. He clearly wanted to be the biggest guy in the room. It was talking about how important he was, and I was like, why would anybody believe this guy? Like it's just amazing to me. The some of the folks that talk about these things, but I'll provide my analysis, and people may say that I've been fooled, and maybe people will agree with me, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, any other questions you got for us? That was a good one.
Okay. I'm trying to think. I mean, one of my big questions obviously is going to be that I do want to know sort of who, and you've told me some of them, but I want to know more in terms of the comments. I'd love to know more of the people you want me to analyze, because I'll analyze anybody. There's nobody that feels off limits in that regard. I don't analyze anybody under 18. That's the only thing I don't do, because there was one person in Vegas actually who had claimed to have seen an alien in their backyard or something like that, and people have been asking me to do that, but I think he was like 15 or 16, so I didn't want to. But beyond that, I'll analyze anybody.
Yeah, and another interesting one would be if you go to look up Dr. Stephen Greer's National Press Club events.
Okay.
There's a lot of content there. He did one a long time ago, like 25 years ago, like around 01, right before 9/11, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And he had a lot of military officials come out. And then he did another one here within the recent years where there were some big names that came out in that one. Jake Barber was actually there trying to run intercept on somebody who was going to be speaking at that. Michael Herrera, I think was his name. And he tells a story of being deployed somewhere out in the Indo-Pacific or Far East area, and they were having to make a humanitarian stop because of and he was with the Army or the Marines. I can't remember which branch he was with, but they had to make a stop to help out with a tsunami situation, and they ran across a UFO operation, and the UFO was actually being used as part of the operation, according to him. The only reason I bring up Michael Herrera to you is he's starting to get a lot of noise. He was in George Knapp's, at the end of George Knapp's Investigation Alien Netflix special. He comes out and talks to George at the end of it. And Michael did Sean Ryan's show. So I guess a good spot for you to find some of these people too is on Sean Ryan. So if you're looking for a non-confrontational Dr. Greer to watch, he did the Sean Ryan show. Have you ever watched any of Sean's stuff?
I have not. No, I'll check it out though.
Yeah, Sean has some pretty good stuff out there. He had Dr. Greer on, and then after Dr. Greer, he had all of the people from that press club event. So he did Michael Herrera, he did Eric Hecker, and I think he did a gentleman named DC Long that was here in North Carolina. So DC Long and Eric Hecker, not as much. Those stories haven't really caught on as much, but Michael Herrera's has, and he's done a lot of podcasts and TV series since then. So he's been on with Jesse Michaels, and like I said, he did a brief cameo there on Netflix with George Knapp's Investigation Aliens. So that might be someone who, if you're looking for someone else, again, like a Jake Barber, an operator, that might be a good one to look at. And you would get a lot of content from the Sean Ryan show of watching Michael Herrera on there. But if you did want to watch him actually at the press club event, you can see him give his detail there as well.
Cool. I'll check it out for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you came on with us. This was really cool. I hope this gave some of the fans a little different take. We're always talking about recent news and things like that and the testimonies these people are giving, but we're never giving you a lot of the analytics of like people really watching what they're saying. Just to let you know, Dr. G, we normally just keep up with the prophecies that these people are spewing. They're always saying something's coming and something's heading down the turnpike, but we never really cover this angle of someone coming in and really putting a different read on these people, because you even brought it up earlier. You said you like to look at the full stack of evidence when you're reviewing something, right? And this is part of that full stack, right? There's their story, then there could be people like yourself who are providing more of a professional analysis of them giving their story and actually telling it to us. So I really appreciate the perspective. Hopefully we can have you on again, but we will include the links below to your channel. Again, Dr. G Explains. It's very easy to find on YouTube, and that's the website as well.
Yep.
So please go over, subscribe, check him out. Any closing comments for you, Dr. G? Anything you want to say?
I just appreciate y'all sitting and listening and giving me a shot to talk about some of this stuff. I'm not part of this community yet. I'm talking about some of the whistleblowers and all that, but I'm hoping to continue to analyze this and hopefully people enjoy the content I'm creating. So I appreciate y'all checking it out.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. G.
You got it. Thanks.